strike rate's very, very overrated.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strike Rate, the Cricket Analytics podcast with me, Jack Hope, and Dan Weston. On this episode, we're changing things up again a little bit. We're going to do a big mailbag episode. We've been receiving a lot of questions, and we thought this time, rather than having a specific topic, we'd throw it open to our listeners. And thank you, listeners, because you did respond. I think we had somewhere in the order of 30 or 40 questions, which is probably a little bit too much to fit into one show. So we might reserve a backup batch of questions for somewhere down the line, or get in touch with us in the future when we go back to topic-based episodes. Dan, how are you doing? It's been a while. Been a week.
Good. Yeah, it's been a week. Yeah, I'm good. And I just want to say thanks to the listeners and stuff who post all those questions on social media, because that actually quite overwhelmed me with the interaction we got. So amazing questions, and obviously, as Jack said, we've probably got about 40 at least, and it's we probably can't get to all of them, might not even be able to get to half of them, but we're going to give it a good go. So even if we don't get to your question, we do really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do remember to make sure that you are clicking like and subscribe as well, to get updates on when future content drops. Wherever that is, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, not Google Podcasts anymore. That's been terminated, so you can't do that. But there's other options. There's other options out there in the marketplace. Dan, before we get into questions for our listeners, there were rumblings in the cricket analytics world this week, weren't there? After Simon Doull went on one of the IPL post-game shows and had a massive go at people with laptops. I know that you had thoughts about this. Let's say, do you want to express any of them in a public forum?
Yeah, I do. Look, I'm actually quite disappointed with Simon Doull, because I think that he's one of the commentators that I value more in terms of being honest in calling out bad performances and stuff. So he is kind of very, very anti those sort of ball chewing innings, basically, that certain icon players like to do, and he's been good at that. So he's not sitting on the fence with that, and he's not sitting on the fence with this. But I think he's so wrong, because ultimately the skill sets required for cricket administration and cricket playing are very, very different. Like you go to a supermarket, and if you were the best shelf stacker in the supermarket, they wouldn't make you head of buying or head of CEO or anything like that, or head of finance, because the skill sets are completely different. And it's the same for cricket as well. I've worked in cricket enough to know that, I mean, there are players right now who I will tell you that I would definitely hire if I was owning a team. Like 100%, there's definitely players I'd hire in a management role. That there is talent there. I can't argue with that. But there's 90% of players I probably wouldn't, and there are players that I would keep well away from that role. So, as with any cross section of society, there is a big difference between the skill sets of different people, and different people have different abilities. Being a cricketer does not mean that you you can run a cricket team. So, for example, Mike Hesson didn't play cricket, but no one would justify the fact that he shouldn't be running a team. He's done a good job as running teams. So, why is Doull indirectly criticising his own countrymen, for example, in that situation? Look at football. We've got coaches like Mourinho didn't have a playing career. Arsene Wenger barely played at that level. Klopp the same. So what are we saying? Are we saying that players, you have to be a player to coach just because you know the game, in inverted commas? No. It's all about the work you put in, your personal skills, your communication, and the talents that you have in specific areas. And obviously in those football contexts, we've talked about head coaches, but I think that the same can go for director of football. I mean, Michael Edwards has just gone back to Liverpool. He was probably the best sporting director that the country has ever seen in the Premier League, and he's never played. He's never really played at football at a high level. So what are we trying to say here? We're saying that you've got to play at a high level to play cricket. No, to administrate cricket. No. Look at the amount of failures that there've been. I know right now that there is players or ex-players in high-profile roles, and people just laugh at how incompetent they are. So look, I'm not going to name names, obviously, but this thing happens. So how about we treat everything on its own merits? We don't have this blasé point of view that, okay, no, we're not going to have anyone involved in any cricket team who hasn't played the game. That's just nuts. And second point I want to make about that is he talks about their sort of analyst team on the show that he works for being the best in the business. Well, how does he know that they're the best in the business? Does he have has he have access to every single analyst's computer to know to check and verify that his current analysts are the best in the business? No, he doesn't. So how does he know what work that I'm doing? How does he know what work Himanish Ganju is doing? There's loads of examples I can give. How does he know that his people are the best? He doesn't. These are just incorrect statements, and it's really quite irritating me because there is this kind of it's definitely a challenge. It's definitely a challenge for anyone who wants to get into cricket analytics, who hasn't played professional sport. There is that extra level that you've got to go to because of opinions like that. Thankfully, those opinions are changing slowly. However, it shows, I think, a really good example, an illustration of how far cricket has to go to catch up with, say, American sports, where the GMs often haven't played sports at any level.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I thought from a cricket analytics point of view, obviously Simon Doull's going to get airtime. That's what's going to happen because he is famous. He goes on the IPL and he talks to millions of people every night about cricket, and that makes him a personality. But I thought a far bigger move in the cricket analytics world was a guy named Will going to the Rajasthan Royals analytics department. So this is a guy who has worked with StatsBomb, which is it's a data provider / a blog / an analytics service that primarily focuses on football, and he's been working there. He's moved to the Rajasthan team to be part of their wider analytics department. And if you look at some of the people that are working there, you can see that Rajasthan are obviously developing something a little bit more American in terms of how their front office will work. This is a guy who, I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure didn't play at a high level of cricket. There's nothing on his LinkedIn when I went through it that suggests that he had a stint at Surrey back in the day. It's that's not what's going on here. But if we look at sort of what this move produces, and if we look at the IPL at the moment and who and which teams look like the most organised franchises, there's probably one team that seem to be pulling ahead of the others in terms of the quality of their decision making, both tactical and strategic. And hires like this are probably partly why. And so Simon Doull's opinion, it's wrong. And I suspect it will look really wrong pretty soon, because once you see one team doing what Rajasthan are doing, which is assembling like an actually planned department of cricket analytics people who, in theory, should be contributing in a major way to the strategy of the cricket sides, and that might include the other Royals franchises around the world as well as Rajasthan, but might not. I don't know that. Once we see that happen, and once you see that being effective, it won't be long before other teams are kind of forced to follow suit. Otherwise, they will be doing dumb things while another franchise is doing clever things. And when that happens, you see games a little bit like last night, to be honest. So we're recording this on Tuesday the 23rd. Last night we had Mumbai Indians v Rajasthan Royals. Mumbai Indians have assembled a pretty good team and made a bunch of really bad decisions to leave themselves 3 and 5. Rajasthan Royals have assembled a pretty good team and then made a load of really good decisions, and they're 7-1, and one of them's going to the playoffs. I think one of them isn't, Dan. So there's, Simon Doull can say what he wants, but ultimately,
different, right?
Yeah, there's going to the what we see play out. I suspect will not back up his viewpoint. Dan, I wanted to, before we get some questions, I wanted to run through a few rule changes with you as well.
Yeah,
so this is quite a loose episode, and we did think about doing a big episode on why there are so many runs, but we did quite a lot of conversation about that last week on our Impact Sub show. So if you want to go back and listen to all of our thoughts about one of the main factors as to why there are so many runs in the IPL this year, I'd suggest you go back to that one. It was a good episode. I did think of some ways that we could slow down run rates, though. And I'm not saying here that this is what we're advocating for, but there's a lot of noise at the moment and around cricket because we've seen so many high scores in the IPL, and we've seen 3 teams exceed the previous record score in the competition in half the matches of this season, which is kind of nuts. So if we wanted to do that, I've got 8 ideas, Dan. I'm going to ask for what you think the impact on the game would be from an analytics point of view, and I want you to rate each idea out of 10. And then, we'll take the proposals to the BCCI should they decide that they do want to slow down the number of runs and make loads of cash. So first up, Dan, you could shorten the power play. You can knock 2 overs off. So I think of the power play as like the first 2 overs are kind of the bowler's time. The ball's moving around a lot. Wickets are quite likely. Tend to perceive fewer runs. Then you have the neutral period, the no man's land, 3 and 4, where it kind of depends on whether there's been a wicket or not. Yeah. And then 5 and 6, they're the batter's time. Like they're the big runs time. If you knocked overs 5 and 6 off the power play, you might force batters to take risks earlier in the power play, which might lead to more wickets, might slow down runs. And obviously, it would be 2 more overs where you have people on the boundary and you couldn't slog. So what's the impact of that? And is it a good idea to slow down the run rate?
I think first of all we need to work out whether the run rate needs to be slowed down, and obviously
What I
want to say is that I think the powers that be in the IPL probably quite delighted with this higher run rate, higher boundary hitting intent and stuff like that, because I think that's what the casual fan wants. And I think it probably sells more shirts, it sells more tickets, and it sells more people on TV, which means that they sell more adverts at a bigger price. So overall, I think probably this won't change. But if we're looking at shorter power play, I think that would have a massive impact. So you look at 4 overs, like you say, you've got to take risks in overs 3 and 4 that you might, or even 1 and 2 when it's bowler's time, that you might not want to take necessarily in this current structure. So I think that would have a massive effect, and overs sort of 7 and 8 are good overs for bowlers to bowl in as well after the power play with the field in the current situation with the field, more players on the boundary, and would 5 and 6 now become the old 7 and 8, for example? So
the data overs,
the cheap overs, and that could be a thing easily. I think it would make a significant difference. When I say significant, you're probably looking at maybe 4 or 5 runs, maybe over an innings. And I think that with these measures here, you might have to adopt 3 or 4 of them to actually have a massive impact. If you want to reduce the average score by like 15 or 20, you're probably going to have to pick up quite a few of them.
Yeah, I think so. Out of 10, what does that one achieve, do you reckon?
In terms of success, I'll give it a solid 8. Okay,
fair enough. So that's one idea. And like you say, I don't think either of us are actually sure that we do want to reduce the number of runs. Like, it might just be for some freak scores that have happened, and we should relax and enjoy that there were lots of 6s and take stock of this in a year's time or something like that. Because I don't, the games have been pretty good, and there's probably some mega auction stuff going on there with some teams not quite aligning in terms of where they are in the cycle. That's meaning the differences between some of the sides are a little bit more extreme than we'd normally see as well. So the second idea, Dan, was an extra man outside the circle. So that would be to keep the game as is, but then from the 7th over on, you have to have a minimum of 3 in the circle, and that would be 6 on the rope. What do you reckon
Yeah.
to that?
Okay, so what that's going to do is it's going to reduce the boundaries, and particularly I would imagine 4% will go down quite markedly because there's going to be less gaps to pierce in the field. What it will do is increase the non-boundary strike rate, but that's not going to have as much effect as a reduction on boundary percentage. So it's going to have some effects, I think, for sure, and change the dynamic of how runs are scored, and maybe values the play. Could bring in more values to the players who are really good at, like, say, running between the wickets and turning ones into twos and hitting pockets in the field, that they can just take like low risk options for twos non-stop. Probably going to scupper those batters who are four oriented, put it that way, who don't like to go aerial but they like to hit gaps. So yeah, I think that will have some impact. I don't think it'll have as much as the power play being shortened, but I think it would have some.
Okay, so out of 10,
6.
Third idea, 8 wickets per team. So instead of the 10, you have 9 nominated batters, and once 8 of them are out, it's innings over. What happens?
Well, for a start, teams have to play more cautiously because they don't have so much depth, and particularly those players, probably sort of 14, 15 over entry point players, like the number 7s and stuff, have got to play a little bit differently because they know that they've got 5 or 6 overs and they can't really lose more than 1 or 2 wickets basically in that period of time. I mean, if you said this to me 3 years ago, I would have said, like, that's nonsense. We shouldn't do that. But the game is now, with the impact sub, has changed, and it has evolved. And I do think that it could actually be worth a conversation. In terms of what it will do, like I said, obviously the players have got to be a bit more cognizant of the depth. But also it's going to lead to situations where teams are all out a lot more, so they're not going to use their full resources. So it will have quite a marked effect on run score, I think.
Fair enough. I agree. I think that would be a rule too far for me personally. I'd rather see other ideas adopted before we just change the number of batters. And I quite like when the bad batters have to bat. That's one of my favourite things in cricket in general. So I think it'd be a real shame if we devised a rule which meant that Bumrah never batted again in T20 cricket. Fourth rule, Dan, and we've seen a lot of people call for this recently, is to get rid of the impact sub. Now, this obviously only applies to the IPL, and we've seen run rates rising across T20 cricket, but specific to the IPL, is there another league? There's actually a couple of other leagues, aren't there? The BBL and the SA20. Yeah, so it applies to a few leagues. My mistake. How much of an impact is this one going to have?
I don't think it will happen. Put simply, very, very simply, because look, what we have seen with the impact sub, and people might not like it, purists in particular, and probably not going to like it, but we have seen a massive increase in scoring. We have seen a massive increase in boundary hitting, and we've seen a massive increase in six hitting. We covered all this last week on the pod. So the problem is that, as I said earlier, that sells. And I don't think that the powers that be will be very happy at reducing or taking away a factor which increases the commercial viability of the products. So I don't think it will happen, for one thing. What will it do? Well, it's going to be some scope as to reducing the scores, for sure. I think last week we spoke about a few factors, such as the increased intent of the domestic player pool. Is another factor as to why strike rates have gone up and average score has gone up. And also the quality of bowlers as well is spread thinner with 10 teams and the impact sub as well. So there are other factors too. Look, it's going to have. It would have a big impact on it, but I don't think it will happen.
So out of 10,
9.
I think
9 for the last one as well. I think we gave a score for that.
Yeah. You're right. Actually, well remembered. I actually have a feeling that this might happen. I think some of the players have been quite vocal. So Rohit Sharma was very vocal about it, and I think that might be the sort of thing that catalyzes people into making a change there. I think ultimately it will depend on how India do at the World Cup, though. If India win the World Cup, they'll say this idea was brilliant. It made us win a World Cup. If it doesn't, if they don't, then they'll be like, we need to change the whole game so that we win the next World Cup. That tends to be how these things go. So I think that's that is the determining factor on that one. Fifth, Dan, we've only got a few more of these. A livelier ball. So if the ball had a harder seam, or swung a bit more, what's the impact of that?
Huge. So I know there's actually kind of been a similar example of this actually in leagues before. So in this year's ILT20, the higher scores from the IPL didn't transfer to the ILT20 despite the impact sub, because the ball did more basically. So what happened was there was a chip put inside the ball, which I guess was for some form of analytics, information gaining, data gaining purpose. And the batters who I know who batted up early in the power play in that league described it as batting with a Duke's ball in April in county cricket red ball. Like they said, it was so difficult. And we saw teams really struggle with the bat. So I mean, that a livelier ball would 100% make a massive impact, and probably is as big an impact as any of these other suggestions.
So that'd be a 9 on the scale.
Yeah, easy.
Yeah, okay. I think that's potentially true. My feeling on that one is, and a lot of these actually, is that the cat's out the bag a little bit in terms of what good T20 batting is now. And I think I said this in almost exactly the same words last week. Like, teams aren't going to stop hitting boundaries because of one of these measures, or stop trying to slog because of one of these measures. So it's a case of how much you can do to make something miss the bat when they're swinging, and I guess a livelier ball is a pretty good example of that. Sixth even on the list, humidors at venues with altitude above 500 meters. Now this one probably needs a little bit of explaining, but the higher you play cricket, the easier it is to hit 6. The air is thinner, and that means there's a reduction in something called the Magnus effect, which means that a ball hit at the same speed with the same launch angle will go further. Then on top of that, the ball dries out, and that means that you can hit it harder and it weighs less. So you have a compounding effect on top of the reduced Magnus effect. What they've done in baseball to counter this, a couple of the places at a couple of the ballparks. So Coors Field, which is at like 1,000 or 2,000 meters above sea level or something like that, which is nuts. And at another stadium in Arizona is installed a humidor, which means that the ball effectively is stored in a little room which has the same atmospheric conditions as sea level. That means that the ball isn't dried out. Now, Dan, this is probably quite a hard one for you to model off the top of your head. So I'm just throwing that one out there, and the idea as a crazy idea for something that we could put in at the Chinnaswamy say, which is about 950 meters above sea level, to try and make the ball a little bit less lively in terms of it flying out of the arena on such a regular basis.
Yeah, so I think, like, to add some more context, you've done some more research on this, didn't you, about the kind of the speed and the trajectory that you might need to hit for a 6 at different venues. I think this was all borne out by you going down this rabbit hole of Arunachal Pradesh as well, where like we started to work out, like we started to do some like deep dive into like how bad they are, and we realised that actually, well, the state is about 8,000 feet altitude. They don't play there, but yeah, there's certainly different conditions around India and around the world, and I think they probably are undervalued in terms of the impact that they have. So one run, let's say there was a massive stadium in Arunachal Pradesh. That is, the one run there is not going to be worth the same as one run at sea level, basically.
Yeah. So I think it would make a big difference. Is Well, it could make a big difference. I mean, like it's. I don't want to get too into the weeds because this falls outside of the conversation a little bit. But lots of people were really stunned that there were loads of runs when Sunrisers played RCB at the Chinnaswamy Stadium, and it's like it's not. It's a good wicket to begin with. It's also a small ground. It also is the highest ground in the tournament, and all of those things, and also RCB can't bowl. Like the possibility that a team could score 290 against RCB is not. It's on the bell curve of possibilities. It's a thing that could happen. I was not that stunned, but if you did want to control runs a little bit, I think that's the sort of thing that we could look into. I don't think it'll ever happen because I think it probably will cost you 30 grand, and that seems like the kind of investment that cricket teams don't like to make. Yeah, exactly. So we've got two more, Dan, and then we'll move on to questions, which was supposed to be the point of this episode. We've got distracted a little bit. Extra overs for bowlers. So if a couple of bowlers could bowl 5 overs, for example, or 4 bowlers could bowl 5 overs, what difference does that make?
Big, because, well, for example, if you're an elite bowler like a Bumrah, I mean that's another banker over for your team, and another over that batters kind of got to play out a little bit to some degree in terms of attacking other bowlers instead. And also, if you have, say, 5, if everyone could bowl, the quota for every bowler was now 5 overs, so you could have 4 bowlers bowling 5. That means you can structure up differently in terms of the other side of things, which is pick more batters again. So basically, could that situation balance as well? So you've got better bowlers bowling, but you've also got more batters in the team with better resources and more depth. So yeah, I mean, be careful what you wish for, I guess, to some degree.
I think, yeah, there is every action is an equal and opposite reaction. Is that the phrase?
Every action is a reaction, he says. Yeah.
There's definitely the possibility that could come back to bite people who are trying to control run rates when Tim David's coming in at 9 or something for Mumbai.
If you're Mumbai, it's probably a good thing.
Yeah. No, for Mumbai, it would be the number one rule that they'd add, I think. And then finally, more margin for leg side wides. So my thinking for this is, one, it means that there's more area that the batter has to react to, which maybe makes it a little bit harder to set themselves for certain shots. 2, it means that bowlers have more margin when it comes to bowling at the stumps. If they try Yorker and it slides just down the leg side, wouldn't be a wide, which encourages potentially more wickets and potentially more cartwheeling stumps, which I think is a good thing. What do you think the impact of this rule would be, Dan?
Good question. I think it would have some in terms of obviously the reduction of the number of wides for a start. And then also, as you say, there's more chance of bowling at the stumps or as well. So there's that but then, maybe that leads to batters taking, being able to take different options that they couldn't take right now as well. So instead of, like, for example, the teams might, against certain batters, look to hide the ball outside or stump because they know that they're not that great at driving or cutting. Now maybe that changes, and I think that this now probably would be a fundamental change actually in cricket to do this, because it's going to take a lot of adaptation, because batters are going to have been selected because of the current rules basically, and actually you might see quite a big change in some of them in terms of the lines which will be adapted from that rule might not suit certain batters or might suit certain batters more. So actually, it's going to have probably an impact on the individual as much as anything else, and then reduce the amount of wides as well. So probably some impact, but I don't think as much as some of the others.
Cool. So out of 10?
6.
Great. We're going to take a break, then we're going to come back, and we are going to start getting into those questions.
I think strike rate's very, very overrated.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strike Rate, the Cricket Analytics podcast with me, Jack Hope, and Dan Weston. we're going to get into some questions. Thanks for sending them in. Make sure you click like and subscribe, and let's get going. With, I think, the big question of the day, which came in from Matthew. He says, Dan, RCB 2024 v Welsh Fire 2022, who would win? So just for some context there, RCB have 1 win from 8. Welsh Fire got 0 wins from 8. Does that mean that RCB would have the psychological edge going into this battle of the wooden spoon?
I think it probably would, yeah. And they're in a higher standard league slightly as well, probably. Although I think Welsh Fire did have a leg spinner, or a decent leg spinner in 2022, which is something that RCB don't really possess. I think that, yeah, RCB would win that. On an anecdotal point of view, I don't know if anyone who's watching or listening remembers the game in 2022 between Welsh Fire and Birmingham Phoenix at Cardiff. Well, just to kind of set the scene a little bit, I think Tom Hellman and Kane Richardson basically defended a runner ball pretty much, or roughly about that kind of figure for the last 2 overs for Birmingham to win. My takeaway from that game in particular was that because of the confidence issue that the Welsh Fire had at that point, that I felt that they didn't know how to get over the line. Basically, they got into a position and actually they were like, all right, okay, well, we should win from here, but what do we do now?
Yeah, fair enough. So you think that RCB just
not just I think that the RCB would win that game minimum 9 times out of 10.
Oh wow, that's RCB. Maybe that's what they need to do: transfer leagues, go and play somewhere else, go and play the Lankan Premier League for a couple of years, get the confidence back up. Line and Length says
do that, in a global system, like they get relegated to like the Lanka League or something like that. All the leagues go into one basically with like feed leagues and stuff like that.
Yeah. Line and Length says, how much will player form from the IPL translate to the T20 World Cup, given the vast difference in conditions? Are there aspects of a batter's performance that are translatable across conditions? So that's relevant, obviously, because there's a World Cup coming up in about a month and a half.
Yeah. So 100%. I've done a lot of work on how players can translate from league to league, and conditions have a massive impact on that. So boundary size is an obvious one. Speed of the pitches is another obvious one. We'll go to, say, West Indies and America in the World Cup. Does that mean, are we going to get fast, bouncy pitches, or perhaps more likely some slower, sort of two-pace pitches, which are quite difficult to bat on? So those will have massive factors. There's no impact sub either, so that's another thing to consider. But then there was also the fact that, I don't know, maybe this is an unpopular view among some people, but I think that the IPL is a higher standard than international cricket, because it certainly was with 8 teams. I think there's not much doubt about that, because a lot of the teams who play international cricket their players are not going to play in the IPL. They're not good enough to play in the IPL. So actually, you should be better against those weaker players in international cricket than you would be against the average IPL player, for example. The average international player in a World Cup is not as good as the average IPL player. And it's the same as football, like is 1 in 2 for a world-class striker a good benchmark for an England player, for example, when you've got to play games against like San Marino and the Faroe Islands and Luxembourg and teams like that, that's like significantly weaker than the opposition that they're going to likely face in the Premier League game in, game out, for example.
Yeah, for sure. As for aspects of batter performance that are translatable across conditions, is there a specific metric? When I looked into this, 6 hitting was the one that was most replicable.
Yeah.
Basically, if a player hits lots of 6s somewhere, they'll probably be able to do it somewhere else. But other things will quite a lot more up and down. So balls per dismissal, people obviously in new conditions get out a bit more, or it maybe suits their game, they get out a bit less. And 4s are so role dependent that they didn't predict it. They weren't backable at all.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there's
So that's
no guarantee you would somewhere else. Go on.
hitting boundary intent, like attacking shot percentage, those type of things are the ones that I think are really transferable. What you say is completely in line with the work that I've done about the translation from lower leagues to higher leagues, for example. For example, let's look at like an IPL batter who plays in SMAT. If you're striking at like 125 in a SMAT, you have no chance in the IPL. It's just like completely logical because you're not gonna bat at 125 in the SMAT against weaker players and then turn into an 10 match in the IPL. Just like you may as well go and buy a lottery ticket if that happens. And generally, when I've done this research, I found that if you step up a level, your strike rate, boundary percentage, 6%, whatever, is not going to have that much of a tail off. What will happen as a consequence of playing at a high level is just going to get out more often. Balls for dismissal.
Satwick says, does bowling matter a lot in T20 now, or is it down to luck and chances that batters take? How do you draw the line between good and bad bowling? Now, this is an interesting one because there's at least one quite big cricket analytics character out on the Twitter sphere who is adamant that bowling is irrelevant, whereas I am still broadly of the opinion that it's more important than batting. Even though that there are more runs, I would rather, given the option, have the best bowling. But I'm interested on your take, Dan.
I'm with you, Jack. Best bowling, easy. It's the clearest driver of success, I think, in terms of if you want to be batting strong or bowling strong, you want to be bowling strong. The characteristics of historically successful teams suggests that bowling strong is basically a non-negotiable. The old cliche is pretty accurate. Batters win matches and bowlers win tournaments, and that's true. You look at the team now who is top of the IPL. They probably have not only do they have probably the best bowling lineup, but they also have the most role clear bowling lineup as well, where they don't make many changes, and it's very well designed. And yeah, for me, bowling strong.
Hello.
Hello, mate. What happened there?
My Wi-Fi just ended, so I'm having.
Yeah.
You just turned off, which is annoying, but I'll figure it out in a bit. So I think we got to the point where you said the team at the top of the IPL.
Yeah. So I'll go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, if you go from there, I'll write down 39 minutes and I'll be able to edit that together pretty quickly. Look at the team. You look at the go on.
If you're looking at the team who's top of the IPL, Rajasthan, I think that they're probably the team who's got a core bowling attack that's really strong and very, very well clear in the type of phases that they bowl in, and they have good backup players as well. And that's not a mistake, Like I read online, someone made a kind of bit of a facetious comment, but there's a lot of merit in it as well. And they said that Rajasthan look like a team who have spent a year locked in a room, away from their family, working on strategy. Whereas RCB look like a team who have just like basically turned up on the day of the first game, basically. And I think that is kind of It's pretty true. They've worked out what works, and I do really disagree with. I know who you mean. The local commentator on social media doesn't matter, because it does. If you look at the characteristics of qualifying teams, it's pretty much always the best bowling teams.
Yeah, and I think there is a different question here that I think sometimes blurs into the question of what's more important, batting or bowling. And I think the answer to what's more important, batting or bowling, is bowling. But the different question is the balance between bat and ball fair? And I think that's a much harder question to answer, and probably falls really outside the scope of an analytics podcast in general, because it's a question of taste and what you want from cricket in general. Like, T20 cricket is trending away from a sport where you're going to see spells of bowling where people are beating the outside edge because people are playing defensive shots. You'll see spells of bowling where people try to hit a six and miss, but you're not gonna see situations where batters are forced into defending anymore. That's gone. That idea is it's in the past.
Yeah.
So if you're asking, is the balance between bat and ball the same as it was? The answer is no to that. The batters are scoring more runs now, but that does not mean that bowlers are less important, because if you are going for a run and over less, you're still really, really valuable to your team. I also wonder, Dan, just on this, whether there's I went back through every year of T20 cricket last week and looked at the highest strike rates in the game. And we've not really seen that go up. So what I mean by this is that if you look back to about 2014, someone will be scoring between 180 and then 190, and it's usually Andre Russell. Maybe you'll get 2 or 3 people scoring in that ballpark, but we haven't seen. Yeah, we haven't seen that top strike rate really increase. What we've seen are the guys who were striking at 130 now striking at 140, and the guys that are striking at 140 striking at 150. And so we're at a place now where about 20% of players are striking above 150, which is the highest that has ever been. But we're still there's like a glass ceiling, if you like, and it seems to be quite difficult over an extended period of time to strike much faster than 190. Maybe that's just that naturally as fast as you can kind of go in cricket. Maybe it isn't. Like, we will see how this develops.
I would say.
Yeah, but not by. Yeah, like there seems to be about 2 runs a ball is about, that could be the natural ceiling. If we're in a situation where all the batters are starting to be able to do that, the individual batter who is able to do that becomes less valuable, whereas the bowler, Jasprit Bumrah, who is able to go way below that run rate and restrict people to 7 and over instead of 11, becomes the unicorn, if you like. They become the most valuable player in the game. And I think if you look at the IPL this year, runs all over the place. Who's the most valuable player? Who would you pick number 1 overall in a draft? It's probably Bumrah, isn't it?
100%. If there was an open market tomorrow with no retentions, he would go for the most, and I'd be shocked if he didn't.
Yeah.
I think also we talked about last week. We talked about reframing expectations on what's good for bowlers, and actually now we're not talking about beating the outside edge or nicking off to slip or something like that, which traditionally has been a value for a bowler in Test cricket, for example, over the years. Now we're talking about boundary prevention, and Bumrah is unparalleled for that, I think.
Cool. We'll move on to Jack, who asks, how sustainable is Sunrisers' batting approach? And more generally, what is the limit to the run rates in the IPL and T20s going forward? So I think I've said there that I think not necessarily in a per game situation, but to a ball seems to be about where you can cap in terms of long-term batting. There'll be pitches and venues where you're able to, in a short period of time, go above that and maybe strike at 250, and we've seen that this season. Maybe even strike at 300. We'll see about that. I'm interested in your thoughts on this. Let's confine it to a game. What's the top score that you think a team could get? How close are we to get 300? And then answer the Sunrisers bit as well.
Yeah, I think that if everything goes right, there's a small percentage chance of 300 in the IPL. Do I think it will happen this year? No. Do I think it can happen? Yes. And I think you mentioned it. So you talk about a venue, Chinnaswamy, for example, small ground, batting team high in 10, bowling team not very good. Like these things can all combine to move the bell curve along in terms of expected outcomes, and increase the percentage chance from nothing to a small amount that 300 can happen. And I think that's how I would describe that. As regards to Sunrisers, I mean, wow. I mean, we've spoken a lot about Sunrisers on the cricket podcast, and we have not been complimentary about them in previous seasons. I think it's pretty fair to say, not just in terms of their results, but the brand of cricket.
Definitely fair to say.
Has been. I mean, I wouldn't watch their matches in the past if they weren't free on my Sky subscription, basically. But this year, unbelievable. Like, I love it. I would pay to watch them. I literally, they have a mentality, a mindset, a brand, identity, whatever you want to call it, that just goes for it. And they're winning a lot of fans at the moment. They're winning a lot of friends, making a lot of friends with the way that they play. Whether they win the IPL or not doesn't necessarily define them, because at the moment they are going to leave a legacy in reframing what is possible for a T20 team in terms of run scoring. Now, to win the IPL, they're probably going to have to play several matches where they're going to be 50-50 or 60-40 favourites or something like that, or round about those kind of things. So actually, it's unreasonable to say that they're going to definitely win the IPL or that will define them. But the change in the way that they've played, I mean, it's like Stoke in Premier League deciding that they want to play like, 5 up front and wins 5-4 in a game, every game basically, or like 5-2 or something like that. I mean, like literally, the change in brand identity is like, I think it's never really been seen before in cricket. As far as the sustainability, look, I mean, they look pretty good right now. They've done it, these sort of 250 plus scores pretty regularly. I like the way that they're doing it. I think it can be sustainable with the current rules and the current spreading of talent, in terms of the bowling talent is spread thinner because there's 10 teams. So yeah, let's see. I'm looking forward to seeing how they continue to go on, basically.
Third Wheel says, for smaller grounds like Chinnaswamy, do you think they should make a slow wicket and make it difficult for the batters? He said he remembers something similar RCB did in the 2017 season, but they failed badly when they did. I guess the question is, Dan, what would you do if you had the Chinnaswamy as a home venue? Would you try and bring the bowlers back into the game?
You don't do that at the moment when they've got no spinners, that's for sure. I think it's not really about what you do to the venue. It's about how you recruit based on the conditions of the venue. So whether if you can make a slow pitch or not, it doesn't change the fact that the Chinnaswamy is the ball travels quicker. We've spoken about that already. It doesn't change the fact that the boundaries are tiny. So actually, what would be a better solution for me is that you recruit players who can adapt to those conditions better than the ones that they've currently got. I mean, but you've got like a joke home venue, which is like, in terms of, when I say joke, I mean joke as in the ease of scoring runs compared to some other venues. So the average score is high. The pass score, which is not the average score, is also high, because the pass score when RCB are bowling, RCB's pass score with their bowling right now is not the same as, I don't know, Rajasthan's pass score with Rajasthan's bowling, if that makes sense, at the same venue. So RCB will be better served finding players who could fit into those conditions. So what they're probably going to have to do is just they're not going to do it. So it's kind of irrelevant. But they've got to pick like a team like Sunrisers have done, like just go for it with high intent. Having players like Virat and to some degree Faf at Chinnaswamy doesn't make a lot of sense because actually they're not necessarily suited to playing at that venue. What I would do would be to pack the team full of intent merchants, maybe 1 or 2 overseas batters, and then just really focus on high intent local batters, and then do whatever you can to pick up the best bowlers and use your bowling as a defence rather than at the moment they just like I don't know what they've done. I genuinely I don't know what their plan was ahead of this season. I mean, there's going to be at this team there's going to be at least one person who's paid a lot of money who has constructed that bowling line.
Yeah, it's not a great one. Vizwez says, in this IPL, we're seeing a lot of good talent being wasted on the bench. How could the trade window be actively used? And should the squad size of 25 be trimmed to 21 so that we get another team given the talent pool? The 11th team, that's one question. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think if you want to do that, then you do it with overseas players and you change the rules quite substantially. I don't think we need to see a league where Shahrukh Khan is a nailed-on starter yet. I've seen enough of Shahrukh Khan to be like, I don't need that every night of the week. Thank you very much. On the other questions, though, trading, Dan, it's a bit of so here's my take on trading. It's a little bit. There's little incentive to do it because the auctions are so regular and because the mega auctions in particular are so regular. All the teams are more or less at the same stage in the win now, rebuild cycle. And when you see trading being very effective, it tends to be in scenarios where a team knows they have a chance of winning a championship and are prepared to mortgage their future to some extent by offering a young player that maybe isn't featuring to a team that is out of contention but has a good player now. There are other scenarios, though. I think you're quite a pro trade advocate, aren't you? Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I am because first of all, I think it gives you a greater competitive advantage if you're good, and I like things like that because outthinking opposition it can only be a good thing. And secondly, I think it would be great commercially and for the drama of the league. We're going to get like I don't know, these typical aggregator Twitter accounts kind of thing who looking just to try and get as many engagements as possible, and they're gonna. There will be if there was a trade window or trading in the IPL, there would be a Fabrizio Romano of cricket in India. There, no doubt about that. And that stuff gets engagement, it gets fans talking, it creates great media content. So I do think that commercially it could be pretty good as well. Who's going to be the Jim White of the IPL on deadline day? Who's going to be the Harry Redknapp giving an interview out of his Range Rover window as he drives out of the training ground and stuff like that? All of that stuff. I don't think the IPL quite has that yet in terms of identity. So I think it would be really good. Look, we talk about the cycles. So, look at I don't know. Let's just pluck some names out of the air. Look at KKR right now. They're doing pretty well. They might think, okay, well, Rajasthan are a little bit ahead of us right now. We want to try and find some players who can give us the opportunity to close the gap on them. So, might they RCB are out? Could we approach them to get Will Jacks on a season-long loan or something like that, like that kind of thing. Or I think it could work. But I think what you'd have to do as well is there would have to be purse adjustments as well. So rather than like the owners just going into their pockets and paying money, I think it has to have purse adjustments for the future as well. So either you've got to
I think that's the other way to do it
this season, or you take it out for next year's.
Yeah, or you are in a situation where there is no mega auction, and that over time will mean that you have some teams that are in a win now mode and some teams that are rebuilding, because that's the cycle of how sports works. And then there's the option to do that. But right now, the rules don't kind of work that way. Lance says, how do you account for predicting outcomes when you don't have full access to some data when not working with the team? For example, you don't have training data or what's going on in the net or the impact of coaching. Can you spot those players that are improving or getting worse behind the scenes?
I think you can summarize this in a very simple answer. All you can do is make the best decisions available to you with the information that you've got to hand. Like if you all you can try and do is get as much information as possible and then make the right decision based on that information. Stuff like training data and things like that actually is probably currently quite a big growth area in cricket. There's a lot of companies are starting up to provide this type of thing. So actually there are ways of quantifying that in terms of looking at players' improvements. Say you've got say you're in county cricket, for example, and you've got a player in an academy who you think visually has improved, but actually you can still quantify that based on their training data as well. I'm not just talking about physical data in terms of they have these kind of the chips in tops kind of thing that you can have. I'm talking also about like the speed that they hit a ball in the nets or the certain you can code and options and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff you can do. So actually, there are ways of doing that, and then going down levels in terms of building a kind of a structure through age group teams, for example. There's more and more data coverage even for those levels as well. So actually, you can start adopting a strategy where your under 15s, for example, are playing the same way as the first team because you're recruiting players who fit into that mindset and that brand of play.
Yeah, and I think this is an area where some of what you're talking about, scouting comes into play. This is why you need scouts, and even in the most analytically developed sports, most talent identification still comes from scouts. With players in the system, that changes a bit, and what you're talking about, Dan, in terms of data around how hard people are hitting the ball and things like that, that can replace traditional scouting in a way, but we don't have that in cricket, and we don't have that widely available. Even in situations where we do have some of it, so you're probably looking at that being a factor as well. I think we've probably got time for a couple more, Dan, before we wrap up, and we did have a lot of questions, so sorry if we don't get to you. It's probably my fault for talking. Yeah, it's probably my fault for doing loads of questions about rule changes in part one. Shriram says, what's the future of right arm off spin in T20 cricket? Currently in the IPL, we have Ashwin Narayan and Varun Chakravarti and Teek Chana. Only Ashwin is a traditional off spinner, though. All others are mystery spinners. What should an upcoming right arm off spinner develop to play T20 leagues?
I'm so glad you brought this question up, Jack, because it's probably one of my favourite questions out of all the ones that were asked. Look, it sounds counterproductive, but it's a thing. The biggest thing that an off spinner can do to become more of a viable commodity in a T20 environment is improve their hitting. That is ultimately the way that you're going to get picked in teams, picked in drafts, picked in auctions, and picked for good money. If you look at it like this, and this is a brutal way of looking at it, but it's also a true way of looking at it. Depending on the league, depending on the gender, because women's cricket have more right-handers than the men's, you're looking at around 75% in men's cricket of balls faced by right-handers. So a bowler who bowls the ball turning into a right-hander's arc is not that valuable because they're only going to match up against 25% of batters. The women's cricket is about 15% of batters. So there's a big matchup disadvantage to start with. Now, so you've got two options. Three options. One, you become incredible at it. So like literally one of the world's best practitioners at your art. Two, you work out how to become more of a mystery spinner, like you say, like where you can maybe turn it the other way as well. Three, you work on your batting and your hitting, because like that's if you look at the reason why I like this question so much is because in county cricket every year you get like the release lists of players, right? I'm not joking you. You could go through years and years of this. There's just so many like 22-year-old kind of age off spinners who get released by counties. Now, if you look around the world, off spinners, and obviously you've given that in an IPL context already, Jack, in terms of those type of bowlers. The only off spinners who regularly feature at the top level, who don't bat particularly notably, are like the absolute elite, like a Nathan Lyon, for example, in Test cricket. Yeah, they just don't exist. You look at England's off spinners recently, Moeen Ali, Dominic Bess, even Joe Root. They all bat. You can make a case for Bashir being different to that, but obviously he's not proven at Test level yet. And this is why I think that he
can bat. So
look, when I say bat, I mean probably in T20 context they've got to be able to.
Yeah. No, I'm just meaning
something like that. Like roughly that kind of level. But what I'm trying to say is that non-batting off spinners basically are like hen's teeth. They don't exist. But you see teams continually invest in them. So all of those counties who release 22-year-old off spinners at that stage of their career, they have wasted a lot of money in basically lottery odds. So 5-6 years of development through academy, through rookie deals, through first professional contracts, and that adds up. You're probably looking at minimum £200,000 investment in a county off spinner from the age of 16 or 17 to the age of 22. Not to mention the time that you could have rediverted, and the coaching resources that you could have rediverted to a different type of player. And name me the last unbelievable off spinner in county cricket who doesn't bat a ball, but doesn't bat in top 7.
I don't know any.
That's what I'm saying. So, but you get this wastage of money and wastage of resources in basically lottery odds on players who are pretty much never going to make it.
Yeah. Dan, we're going to have to wrap up there. Just a thanks to Christus, Vera, Alex, Sujit, Basbal, Convert, Cricket on Your Screens, Smith and Regista, who asked questions that did make the cut, but we've run out of time, unfortunately. Thanks everyone else who sent us a question. And we look forward to picking up some of these in the future. Some of them, Smith, hi guys, a couple of years ago you rated the major T20 leagues in order of terms of standard. Would be interested to see how that list has changed given the addition of Major League Cricket, SA20 and ILT20. That could be a really good episode itself, also talking about the differences between those leagues in terms of conditions and things like that. So maybe we'll think about doing that. Yeah. So we will get to them. Thanks very much. Remember to click like and subscribe. We will be back next Tuesday.